Before you can truly understand what lives in someone else's mind, you have to face the noise that lives in your own. This isn't comfort speak. It's a reality check. Your thoughts, your triggers, your craving to be liked, to feel secure, to prove you're right. They don't just influence your emotions, they color your perception. When your inner world is chaotic, you're not seeing others clearly. You're seeing them through the smoke of your own reactions. That's not understanding. That's projection. Real understanding doesn't come from cleverness or psychological techniques. It begins in silence, not just any silence, but the kind the Stoics disciplined themselves for, where ego dissolves and your awareness sharpens like a blade. When your mind is calm, like undisturbed water, it turns into a mirror, and only in that reflection can the truth in others emerge. Not through force, not through analysis, but naturally. You see not just their words but their meaning, not just their behavior but their burdens. But society doesn't train us for this. It pushes noise. Speak louder, move faster, win at all costs. And that static, it kills your sensitivity to everything that's real. If you've ever felt like everyone's wearing a mask and you can't read behind it, this message is for you. We're not going to look harder. We're going to listen deeper. We'll uncover what Stoic clarity really is, how to still your mental noise, and how that inner calm can sharpen you far beyond any surface tactic ever will. If this message resonates, if it shifts something in you, there's a simple way to show it. Just tap that subscribe button. It helps more than you know, and it keeps us diving into things that matter. Let's get into it. Because the art of reading people starts not with them, but with you. And the first essential skill, the root of all insight, is stillness. Not the numb, passive kind that disconnects, but the alert, alive kind. The kind that listens with full attention. Stillness isn't freezing. It's focus. It sharpens perception, widens awareness, and silences ego. No judgment, no fixing, no crafting a response, just presence. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." That's what this stillness is, awakening. Not just through introspection, but through discipline. The practice of not reacting. To hear deeply, your mind has to stop racing to reply. Have you ever been with someone and actually felt the cadence of their voice? Noticed how their breath shifts when they touch something vulnerable? Felt the weight of the silence before they say something real? Those are rare moments. They don't arrive with clarity. They live in pauses, in slight discomfort. In a glance, a change in tone, a posture pulled back, details you miss if you're caught in your own mental static. Most people miss them. Not because they're hidden, but because they're not quiet enough inside to notice. Culture teaches speed. It glorifies sharp comebacks, instant opinions. But wisdom isn't rushed. Socrates said, "An unexamined life is not worth living." Yet how often do we race through conversations without ever questioning what's beneath someone's words? Stillness gives you a moment, a breath, between what's being shared and how you react. And in that space, something incredible happens. You stop seeing the person as a side character in your life and start seeing them as someone living a full story of their own, with their own logic, their own rhythm. It's tempting to think that to understand people, we need more words, more information. But often, it's restraint that reveals the most. The silence that reveals the most. Plato once said that silence is consent, but it also does something more. It brings clarity. In quiet, the truth of another person doesn't need to be extracted. It rises on its own. They feel that you're not there to judge or rush, you're simply present. And in that safety, masks begin to fall, often without them realizing it. Here's the paradox. The more you master stillness, the more you begin to see what was always right in front of you. Micro-expressions, nervous habits, the subtext behind their stories. You sense when someone's words don't align with their body, You don't need to dissect it. You feel the dissonance, because now your mind isn't clouded by your own assumptions. You're not layering fears, fantasies, or expectations onto the other person. You're just seeing. Aristotle said, knowing yourself is the beginning of wisdom. That's not just about self-knowledge, it's the key to reading others too. When you're grounded in inner stillness, you begin to catch yourself, your snap judgments, your urge to dominate the moment, the subtle ways you steer things back to you. And once you catch those habits, they lose their grip. You stop filling space with noise. You stop listening just to reply. You arrive in the moment, and people feel it. That's respect. Not just for others, but for the unspoken truth that silence holds. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means you're making room for something deeper to unfold, something real. When someone feels truly seen with no pressure to perform or explain, they show themselves, not to impress you, but because they finally feel safe to be authentic. That's what stillness gives. Not emptiness, but presence. And in a noisy world, that kind of attention is rare and powerful. Understanding someone doesn't begin with what they say. It begins with what they reveal once you've quieted down enough to hear it. Reading people starts where your own narrative ends. You can't understand others while your mind is still narrating your next move, your assumptions, your internal monologue. That mental chatter distorts reality. To read people clearly, you have to set aside the story you're telling yourself and just observe. But what exactly are you observing? Everything. And not in some vague, mystical way, in a concrete, physical one. It's not just about the words they use, it's about what exists in between them. The pause before they answer something raw, the drop in their tone when they speak of something that matters, the brief flash in their eyes when something touches a nerve. These aren't secrets, they're just quiet. And if your mind is loud, you'll miss every one of them. We're taught to focus on the words, to measure what's said. But truth doesn't always speak through language. People say what's safe, what they think they're supposed to say, what avoids discomfort. But the body, it doesn't lie. It's in the tension around their eyes, the quick glance away, the restless hands. When words and body language don't align, trust the body. Aristotle also said, we are what we repeatedly do. And that applies here too. People reveal themselves in repetition, how they tense up when emotions rise, how they retreat when touched too closely. These aren't accidents, they're patterns. And the more you notice, the clearer they become. It's not about turning people into puzzles. It's about watching long enough to see what stays the same when the mask slips. There's real power in witnessing without reacting. When you don't rush to fill the silence, your attention gets sharper. You begin to feel when something is off. Not because of logic, but because your whole awareness is present. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves, and you'll often meet someone's shadow not in their words, but in what they avoid, what they downplay, what they deflect with laughter. Have you ever heard someone say, "I'm fine," and deep down you knew they weren't? That's not your imagination, that's perception. But it only comes online when you stop projecting your own past onto someone else. When you let go of the need to fix, rescue, or judge, and just see. Socrates said, "To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom." And that wisdom doesn't just make you wiser, it makes you more present with others. When you're self-aware, you stop confusing their sadness with your memories. You stop mistaking their silence for rejection or their frustration as a threat. You begin to read what is, not what you fear it to be. Reading people isn't about clever tricks. It's about being still enough to truly notice, not forcing understanding, allowing it. You don't need to figure someone out instantly. You just need to quiet your own world. And the outside world will speak louder than ever. Not always in words, but always in truth. People can lie with their mouths. They can smile and say all the right things. But their body will always tell the real story. The shoulders curl in, not from peace, but from retreat. The laughter is rehearsed, but the eyes stay flat. They nod to your words, but their torso turns toward the door. These aren't random tics. They're signals, and they're clear, if you're really looking. The untrained mind listens to words. The trained one listens for truth, and truth, more often than not, lives in the spaces between. Plato once said, "All learning has an emotional base, and emotional truth can't be faked for long." It shows up not in declaration, but in breath, posture, and tension that never lies. So if you want to get better at reading people, stop focusing only on what they say. Start noticing what they show. But here's the truth. Before you can read another person, you must first get honest about your own signals. That's where the process begins. You must become an observer of yourself. How does your body react when you're pretending you're okay? What does your expression do when you're fighting back tears? Notice how your jaw tightens when you suppress anger, how your fingers fidget when you feel exposed. These tiny behaviors are tells, and once you recognize yours, you'll start recognizing them in others, not through effort, but through familiarity. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That includes your body's unconscious behavior, those gestures you've repeated for years without even noticing. Your body remembers everything, even the things your mind tries to erase, and so do theirs. The more honestly you observe your own physical truth, the easier it becomes to recognize it in someone else. Reading people isn't about tricks or manipulation. It's about noticing what most ignore. Think about it. When someone walks into the room and says they're fine, but something in your gut says they're not, that's not intuition. That's presence. That's your awareness, catching the mismatch between their words and their energy. And the stiller you are inside, the louder those subtle contradictions become. It's not about over-analyzing every twitch. It's about seeing the patterns that reveal themselves over time. That's where the truth lives. Not in isolated gestures, but in repeated reactions under pressure. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And if you're not examining your own cues first, your view of others will always be blurred by bias, assumption, and projection. So start by watching yourself. Not to judge, but to understand. Notice your reactions, your defense mechanisms, your avoidance patterns. The more clearly you see your own habits, the more they'll make sense when you see them in others. You won't be fooled by their forced smile or confused by their silence, because you've seen it before in the mirror. This kind of awareness doesn't just sharpen your observation, it deepens your compassion. When you see someone hiding, you don't rip the mask off. You understand why it's there. You've worn one too. That quiet empathy is what makes others feel safe. Not interrogation, not pressure, but your ability to stay still enough to witness them without judgment. Reading others starts with reading yourself. The body is always speaking. Your job is to learn the language, not to gain control, but to build connection. Because behind every movement, every pause, every shift in tone, there's a story, and that story wants to be seen. Self-awareness is the gateway to external awareness. It always begins with you. The more you understand your own emotional language, your triggers and habits, the easier it is to recognize those patterns in someone else. But if you've never slowed down to notice how your body changes when you're anxious, or how your voice shifts when you're hiding something, your ability to read others will be unstable at best. You'll be guessing. And in human connection, guessing is dangerous. You might mistake quiet for rejection, or strength for arrogance. What you interpret will always be filtered through what you haven't yet faced in yourself. So next time you sit with someone, really sit with them. Slow down. Let go of the need to steer the conversation, to fill the silence. Pay attention to the moments before speech. They hold more truth than we often realize. Energy in a room shifts without a word being spoken. Someone's posture changes when a vulnerable topic is raised. The air tightens with discomfort left unspoken. You don't have to name it, just notice it. Understanding doesn't begin with answers. It begins with awareness. And no, this isn't about reading minds or manipulating people's emotions. It's much simpler and much harder. It's about being present, fully, and that's rare. Most people don't really show up in conversation. They're distracted, scrolling their thoughts like social media. But presence, real presence, doesn't need to impress. It doesn't push. It doesn't perform. It simply listens. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But for transformation to occur, both must be fully there. People don't open up because you said all the right things. They open when they feel unthreatened, and that safety often comes through silence, not words, through the kind of attention that doesn't force anything but simply waits. That presence gives others space to unfold. And when they finally do, it won't be because you pushed. It'll be because you stopped trying to push at all. Think about it. When was the last time someone looked at you with no agenda, no rush, no need to win? You trusted them, didn't you? Not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't have to say. They were there, fully. That's when your guard dropped, not because they demanded it, but because their stillness invited it. And here's the paradox. The less you try to read people, the more you actually see. Not by working harder, but by no longer interfering. No more guessing, no more pushing. And that's when truth has space to rise. But remember, truth doesn't scream. It whispers, in a breath, in the pause, in the topic someone avoids. You don't catch that when you're rushing. You catch it when you're still. Because the most revealing things aren't hidden in dramatic moments. They live in repetition, in patterns. It's when no one's watching that people show you who they are, how they respond to tension, whether they shift away from emotion or shrink back when asked something vulnerable. These aren't random glitches. They're signals. Socrates said wisdom begins in wonder, and when you stop needing to define everything too soon, when you sit in that wonder, you begin to see people not as you wish them to be, but as they actually are. Anyone can seem calm in a still moment. Anyone can offer kindness when it's easy, or speak truth when the cost is low. That doesn't make them calm, kind, or honest. It just means things were aligned for a moment. But what about when stress hits? When they're cornered? If someone lashes out under pressure, deflects when emotions surface, or shuts down when you get too close? Those aren't flukes. Those are rhythms, patterns. And patterns always tell the real story. The human mind under pressure doesn't reveal itself in perfect lines, but in repetition. Carl Jung reminded us, until we make the unconscious conscious, it controls us, and we call it fate. Most people live out the same script daily, especially when no one's paying attention. The way they sidestep hard emotions, change the subject, or shift their tone. These are not mistakes. They're part of the message. Your role isn't to name it too fast. It's to witness it. Not from a place of control, but from quiet awareness. Let the pattern unfold. Let their behaviors accumulate. One instance could mean anything. Two might still be unclear. But 3, 4, 5, that's when a rhythm begins to emerge. And with that rhythm, you begin to understand how someone really operates. Socrates warned that true wisdom is in knowing how little you truly know. That includes people. Rush to judge, and you're likely to get it wrong. Most of who we are can't be seen in a single moment. Understanding requires time, and you must be willing to give it. Maybe you're wondering, what if I misread someone? What if I get it wrong? You will. We all do. None of us see with perfect clarity. We bring our own past, our own assumptions, our own pain into every interaction. But the goal isn't to be flawless. It's to stay aware, to pay attention with humility, not suspicion, to let people show you who they are, not through isolated words, but through repeated truths they don't even realize they're sharing. Patterns don't shout, but they don't lie either. And when you stop pressing, stop needing to define people on the spot, those patterns begin to reveal themselves naturally. Your only job, be still, let the rhythm speak, and when it does, believe it. Not as a final verdict, but as a quiet truth that's always been there, waiting for you to notice. Clarity isn't about certainty. It's not about judging quickly or solving someone in 5 minutes. Clarity is staying open. It's walking into a moment without needing to prove a point, without grabbing for control. You don't read someone by locking in your first impression. You read them by staying curious, and curiosity, real curiosity, is never forceful. It doesn't finish people's sentences. It doesn't rush to conclusions. It observes. It listens for what isn't said. Carl Jung said everything that irritates us about others can lead us to understanding ourselves. That kind of insight begins when you stop reacting and start exploring. When someone says, "I'm fine," but every story they tell drips with sadness, listen to the story, not just the words. When they say, "I trust you," but go silent the second you touch a wound. Pay attention to the energy, not just the speech. Truth doesn't always arrive with a spotlight. It hides in the contradiction, in the space where what's said and what's shown don't match. And contradiction isn't deception, it's humanity, because people are complex. We're constantly balancing who we are with who we think we should be. If you're only listening for consistency, you'll miss everything real, the fear, the unfinished thoughts, the hesitation that holds weight. That's why reading people requires something deeper than logic. It requires presence. The kind that stays grounded even when emotions rise, because the final and most essential skill is this: hold your center. If their anger makes you flinch, if their pain pulls you under, if their silence sends you spiraling, you're not reading, you're reacting. And when you're reacting, you lose the signal. You can't see clearly because your emotions take over the space. But if you stay steady, if you feel their energy without absorbing it, if you witness their fear without needing to rescue it, something incredible happens. You become the still water, and people, without realizing it, begin to show you who they are. Not because you forced it, but because your presence made it safe. Plato said, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle." And that battle, it doesn't always scream. It whispers. It shows up in posture, in the tremor of a voice, in the long pause that carries something unspoken. You don't need certainty to catch those moments. Just presence, just calm attention. When you hold your center, you become the mirror. And in that mirror, people begin to see the version of themselves they've hidden, even from themselves. That's where connection begins, not in knowing everything, but in making space for what's ready to be seen. In the end, the quietest presence often hears the loudest truths. You don't have to chase understanding. You just need to create stillness and let truth arrive. If this message stirred something in you, there's another video on screen that goes even deeper. Thank you for being here, for being a part of Stoic Post. The journey continues, not in noise, but in awareness. Stay grounded, stay curious, and I'll see you soon.